Dear fellow white people, I have a message for you. If you identify as a non-black person who is not racist, this message is directly for you. My name is Forrest. I'm an inner child coach and a healer, and I would love to be your friend. Unfortunately, the reality is that racism is so much more complex than what meets the eye. It's a very common misconception that I once had to think, well, I don't hate black people, or, I don't actively discriminate against black people or people of color, so I'm not a racist person. The reality of it is that it just doesn't work that way, and I'll go into that in a second, but I have started down this journey of unpacking white privilege and what does that mean, and how does that affect how I as a white person show up in a space in the world in my daily life. It's something that I had to go out of my way to learn. I'm still on this journey, and I would love to share with you what I have learned thus far on my journey, so hopefully you don't feel so alone in your experience and you can have more clarity in how to live in line with your values. The first part of this video series, we will be addressing what even is white privilege. We'll also be talking about ways to live in line with your identity as a person who is not racist. It is actually so much more than a simple judgment of your character. It's actually about your actions and how you show up. I'll give some more information about some common blocks that I see getting in the way for white folks, including myself. It's been addressed as white fragility. We'll just break that down a little bit more so that it's super duper clear and you have a clear idea of where to go from here. We are peacemakers if we use our voices. If we just sit by in silence, then we're actually just perpetuating the problem. So what the hell is white privilege? I've actually talked to a lot of white folks that don't understand or see their white privilege, and that's okay. That's the thing about privilege. It's not obvious. You don't know you have it unless you really go out of your way to look for it. White privilege just means that, your life is not difficult due to the color of your skin. Being a human is a difficult experience. Everybody, no matter your privilege, no matter your demographics, it's a difficult experience. We all experience trauma the same way in the brain. No matter what that trauma looks like, it feels painful. We experience pain as humans. It's inevitable. The thing is, people experience different forms of trauma based on how people perceive them and the subconscious mind, and how the systems in our environment actually create our subconscious mind, and how that creates systems of harm. White privilege, just a clear example of it is as a white person, you can go to the store and get Band-Aids and they will match your skin color. When you went to school as a kid, you got to see white people who have the same skin color as you in the history books. And just for perspective, consider this. The objective truth does not exist. It just doesn't exist. Even me speaking to you now, I'm speaking through my eyes, which is one subjective experience based on all of my life experiences. Everything is subjective. I just want you to be open to that. When we learned in history class, it was from the perspective of someone. If you break down the word history, his story. It's not her story, it's his story. So we're listening to the story of men, and not only men, but white men. White men from a place of privilege and power. And when I say privilege in the context of history, I mean, if you really stem back, it's the people that colonized this land. This land originally, there were indigenous peoples living on it, and they were living and they were living in harmony with the nature. They had this vast respect for the earth, and they really lived mindfully in community. And then the people from Europe came here and decided to just claim this land as their land, and they murdered a bunch of indigenous people. They committed genocide, very intentional genocide, so that they could dominate this land and claim it as their own, and claiming that they discovered it. In reality, there were already people living on it, so how could you discover something that's already discovered, right? It's all subjective, it's one perspective. In history class, in school, white people and all people in the United States learn the lens of history from the dominators. The people who are telling the story are the people who won the battles, the people who committed these acts of violence and aggression and domination. So something to consider is that you have learned history from the single viewpoint of one single demographic: rich, white, affluent men, cisgendered men, meaning they identify with the gender assigned to them at birth. Super narrow. Me as a white person, it didn't even occur to me that there was history that I had to go out of my way to learn. Like, even the civil rights movement is told from the perspective of white people. And, like, of course, they're going to have a different perspective than black people. There are many black people in America that have to go out of their way. They have to educate themselves to learn the history of their own people. And, like, one piece of white privilege is just not having to go out of your way to learn your ancestors' perspective of history. White privilege shows up as a lot of different ways. I'm going to provide you with some resources that make it very clear, because, like, as well-intentioned as you are, that's like the first step. Myself in my journey, I have learned so much that it was just, like, shocking to me, like things I could not see until I studied them. And I was like, whoa, I've been benefiting from white privilege my entire life, you know? And, like, even my parents, who, like, had kids super young, and they experienced discrimination based on their income level and their age. And they were able to ascend social classes, and, like, they definitely worked for that. And if their skin was a darker color, it could have been much more difficult for them to do that, just because of the way the world will treat you. White privilege is being able to be seen by the cops and not be mistaken as a threat. Like, if you look at the protesters during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, what you see is, like, a lot of white, mostly white people protesting that they want to get their hair cut and that they want to go back to work, because they, from my perspective, that they have a loss of purpose if they're not working. They don't know who they are anymore. So they want to go back to work, and they feel attacked because they aren't able to do that. You see people approaching government officials with huge weapons and being very aggressive in their face, and the president's reaction is like, these are good people, we should negotiate with them. And then you see black people protesting that they're experiencing systemic violence every single day. The only difference is that now there is more visual evidence of it that's circulating, and people are opening their eyes to it. And when they protest that their lives are being taken, even when they're showing no threat, they are received with tear gas and rubber bullets and police brutality. That's another facet of white privilege. The list goes on and on. I will share resources where you can inspect this further. It's really interesting. I just want to say, like, thank you for sticking around this far and being willing to really look at privilege and see what you can do in your life to have a positive impact on the world and to not perpetuate harm. There's enough harm going on in the world, and as a white person, you really have the power. Like, people listen to white voices, they just do. So it's so important now more than ever to use your voice and to get super clear on how to do that.